What kind of man marries a stranger he met only hours before? Jim Holay never thought he would be that man, yet the moment he saw the abandoned bride sitting alone at the Dodge City train station, something inside him shifted in a way he could not ignore. The summer heat of August 1883 wrapped Dodge City like a tight blanket. Dust swirled in the air, stinging eyes and settling on every wooden plank of the busy station. People rushed past in noisy waves as a fresh train groaned and hissed to a stop. The whistle echoed through the air, as though announcing trouble or destiny, no one quite sure which. Jim stepped off a stagecoach with a sore back and a heavy heart. His saddlebag was worn, his boots scuffed, and the grief he carried for his wife and child felt heavier than anything he owned. He had no intention of staying long. Just find some work, earn a few dollars, and keep drifting until the ache in his chest finally loosened. But life has a way of surprising even the most guarded souls. That was when he noticed her. A woman in a purple gown sat on a trunk near the platform. Her hands were folded in her lap, but her tense shoulders showed the truth. She was hoping, waiting, looking for someone who never came. Her face was flushed from the heat, her curls messy from the ride. But what caught Jim's attention wasn't her size or her dress. It was the pain in her eyes. The kind of pain he knew too well. People passed her with quick glances, some pitying, some rude, some whispering. Jim felt a slow burn rise in his chest. He had seen cruelty in many forms, but the kind directed at her cut deeper than it should have. Maybe because it reminded him of how fragile a heart could be. He told himself to walk away. He told himself he didn't need involvement. But his feet started moving toward her before his mind made the decision. Her name, he soon learned, was Clara Davenport. She was a mail-order bride who had traveled all the way from Philadelphia. She clutched a crumpled envelope in her hand as she spoke with the station master, her voice trembling with anger and shame. Her intended husband, a rancher named Robert Price, had taken one look at her from a distance, decided she was too big for his liking, and fled without a word. Jim listened to the exchange, feeling his jaw tighten in disbelief. The station master tried to be polite, but even his tone carried a hint of pity. Clara looked ready to crumble. Her eyes were glossy, her breath shaky, as she tried to explain she had nowhere else to go. Jim stepped forward before he even realized he was doing it. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked, removing his hat out of respect. Clara turned toward him, startled. Her eyes were warm brown, filled with hurt, but also a strong spark beneath it. She hesitated, unsure whether to trust him. But something in Jim's steady voice seemed to calm her. I'm fine," she said softly, though it was clear she wasn't. "He decided he didn't want me." Jim felt something twist inside him. "You don't deserve that." She blinked, surprised at the kindness. The station master joined in with advice about lodging, but the only place nearby was rowdy and unsafe. Clara pressed her hand against her forehead like she was fighting a wave of panic. "I don't know where to go," she whispered. Jim glanced at her trunk, then at the dusty road ahead. He didn't know what he was thinking, but he knew he couldn't leave her there. "Mrs. Farnsworth runs a boarding house on the edge of town," he said. "It's quiet. She'll treat you right. If you want, I can walk you there." Clara studied him for a long moment. Her eyes searched his face, as though trying to see if he had any hidden intentions. Jim kept his expression open and calm. He just wanted to help. That was all. Finally, she nodded. "Thank you." Jim arranged for the station master to watch her trunk. They walked through the dusty street, passing saloons where cattlemen leaned against posts, and watched them with curious or mocking eyes. A few snickers reached their ears, but Jim's cold stare silenced the worst of it. Clara's cheeks burned with embarrassment, but Jim stayed close, like a silent shield beside her. Mrs. Farnsworth welcomed them with a warm, motherly smile. She sized up the situation quickly and took Clara inside without hesitation. Jim explained what had happened. The older woman shook her head, clucking her tongue in disapproval. "Men like that should be ashamed," she said. Clara stayed in one of the upstairs rooms, and Jim lingered a moment in the entryway after she disappeared up the steps. He wasn't sure why he stayed. Maybe it was the quiet pull he felt when she looked at him. Maybe it was the old ache of wanting to protect someone again. That evening, when Jim returned for dinner, Clara was already seated at the table. She gave him a small smile. A tired smile. But real. Mrs. Farnsworth served stew and cornbread, and they ate together with shy conversation breaking the silence. Clara told him about her life back east, her long days working as a seamstress, the loneliness that pushed her to answer an ad for a husband. "I thought I would be useful," she said, eyes lowering. "Strong. Hard-working. I didn't know I'd be judged before I even spoke." Jim's heart ached for her. "He didn't deserve you," he said simply. She looked up with wide eyes, almost shocked by the sincerity in his voice. As the meal ended and the evening quieted, Jim stepped outside. The night breeze carried the scent of dusty grass and far-off horses. He wanted to leave. He should have left. But he didn't. Something about Clara stayed with him. Her strength, her hurt, her courage, and somewhere deep inside, something long quiet stirred awake. He went to bed that night with a single question on his mind. Why did he care so much about a woman he had just met? And what was he supposed to do now that he did? What kind of courage does it take for two wounded people to stand together against a world that keeps trying to push them down? Jim Holay wondered this as he woke the next morning with Clara Davenport on his mind. He told himself it was concern. He told himself she deserved protection, but deep down, he knew something else was taking root in his heart. Jim found a bit of work at the stables that day, cleaning stalls and hauling feed. The labor was rough but familiar, and the rhythm helped keep his thoughts steady. Yet every time he paused, he found his mind drifting back to Clara, her trembling voice, her brave eyes, her quiet dignity, despite the humiliation she had faced. By evening, his feet had carried him back to Mrs. Farnsworth's boarding house as if he had no say in the matter. Clara was sitting alone on the porch, her hands folded neatly, the last rays of evening sunlight brushing her cheeks. She looked tired but stronger somehow, like she had spent the day holding herself together piece by piece. "Evening," Jim said as he approached. She rose slightly from her seat. "Good evening, Mr. Holay." He tipped his hat. "How are you holding up?" "I'm managing," she replied softly. "I found some small sewing work today. A few ladies in town needed mending. It's not much, but it's something." Jim leaned against the porch railing, studying her face. She was trying hard to stay composed, but beneath the surface, he sensed a deep fear. Fear of being alone, of being unwanted, of failing in a place she traveled so far to reach. "You're doing better than most would," he said gently. "You're stronger than you think." Clara looked down at her hands, a shy but grateful smile touching her lips. "Thank you," she murmured. They talked until the sky turned dark, sharing simple stories about their lives. Jim told her about losing his wife and daughter to fever. Clara listened quietly, her eyes soft with sympathy. When he finished, she reached out and touched his hand. The simple gesture almost undid him. "You didn't deserve that pain," she whispered. He swallowed hard. "You didn't deserve yours either." In the days that followed, their bond only deepened. Clara worked whenever she could, sewing, mending, hemming, anything to earn a few coins. Jim took odd jobs across town, but each evening he found his way back to her. They ate together, they talked, they laughed, and slowly the walls both of them carried began to crumble. Then one night, a letter arrived from Clara's family in Philadelphia. Mrs. Farnsworth brought it up to her room during supper. Clara opened the letter with trembling fingers. "My family sent a few dollars," she said quietly. "They want me to come home. They think I was foolish to come here." Jim felt his chest tighten. His spoon paused halfway to his mouth. "Do you want to go back?" he asked. Clara looked up, eyes glassy. "I don't know. I feel ashamed, like I've failed. But I don't want to go back to being the woman everyone pitied. I came here to be a wife, to start a new life." Her voice cracked. "And now I have nothing." Jim's heart squeezed painfully. He set his spoon down and reached across the table, taking her hand. "You're not nothing," he said firmly. "You're brave. And kind. And stronger than anyone I've met in a long time." Tears filled her eyes. "I don't have a home here," she whispered. "I don't know where I belong." Jim hesitated. His throat felt tight. His pulse hammered like a drum. The words rose before he could stop them. "You can belong with me." Clara froze. "What?" He took a breath, steadying himself. "I may not have much, but I can work, I can build something. You don't deserve to be alone, Clara. And I." His voice faltered. "I don't want to watch you walk away." Quote. Her lips parted in shock. "You hardly know me." "I know enough," he said softly. "Enough to see your heart, enough to want a life with you. Maybe it's sudden, maybe it's wild, but it feels right." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "Are you sure?" she whispered. Jim nodded. "More sure than anything." By the next afternoon, Dodge City buzzed with whispers as Jim Holay and Clara Davenport stood in front of the county clerk's office. A small crowd gathered, curious about the widower marrying the too-fat bride who had been abandoned at the train station. Mrs. Farnsworth fussed around Clara, fixing her hair and straightening her borrowed shawl. Clara's cheeks were red, but her eyes shined with courage. Jim stood tall, calm, steady, the kind of steady a woman could lean on. The clerk grumbled through the paperwork, muttering about quick weddings and poor decisions, but Jim ignored him. When the moment came, he took Clara's hands. "I do," Jim said, his voice steady. Clara lifted her chin, tears glimmering. "I do." Quote. They exchanged simple rings, and in a quiet moment that seemed to pause time itself, the clerk pronounced them man and wife. A small cheer rose from the crowd. Jim lifted her veil and kissed her softly. The world around them blurred into nothing but that warm, steady moment. Later that evening, as they shared dinner at the Dodge House Hotel, Clara's voice trembled with wonder. "I never expected my life to change in a single day." Jim reached across the table, brushing her hand with his. "Sometimes the best things happen when you least expect them." But the peace of the moment wouldn't last long. Because far from Dodge City, a man named Robert Price had learned of their wedding. And the look on his face wasn't surprise. It was fury. What does a woman do when the past tries to claim her back? And what does a man do when danger comes for the person he swore to protect? These questions pressed hard on Clara Holay's heart as the days after her wedding unfolded like a fragile dream. The joy of finding a partner, the hope of building a new life, she held on to these tightly, but fear lurked at the edge of every sunrise. Jim worked the land with renewed purpose. He rented a small patch of dry ground near the Arkansas River, determined to turn it into a homestead. Clara sewed for townsfolk, earning a steady trickle of money. Day by day, the two of them poured their sweat into the earth, learning to lean on each other through each small hardship. But even as they built something real together, Dodge City whispered unsettling news. Robert Price was back. He had no right, no claim, no promise, but a cruel man rarely needs a reason to stir trouble. And Robert's pride had been wounded in a way he would not ignore. He first appeared when Clara was tending the chickens behind the barn. Hooves thundered across the dusty ground. Clara turned just as Robert dismounted, his eyes cold and sharp. "Well now," he said with a biting smile, "you're living the hard life. Sure you made the right choice?" Clara's breath caught, but she did not step back. "Go home, Robert. You have no business here." Robert smirked. "I offered you a ranch with comfort. You threw it away. Women like you don't get many chances." Clara's voice shook, but she held her ground. "You never wanted me, only someone to work your land." Robert shrugged. "Maybe I changed my mind." Clara stiffened. His words crawled over her skin like something rotten. Before she could speak again, Jim stepped from the barn doorway, wiping sweat from his brow, his eyes hard as flint. "That's enough." Robert turned, smirking wider. "Well, if it ain't the widower, you got yourself a wife, I see." Jim moved closer. placing himself between Robert and Clara. "You left her at the station like she was nothing. You don't get to come back here." Robert's jaw tightened. "She was mine first." "No," Jim said in a low voice. "She was never yours." For a moment, Robert's hand hovered near his gun belt. The tension cracked through the air like a whip. Clara's chest tightened. But after a long, poisonous stare, Robert spat on the ground. "This isn't over." He swung into his saddle and rode off, leaving a cloud of dust and dread hanging over their land. That night, Clara cried quietly as she washed dishes. Jim came up behind her, placing a gentle hand on her arm. "I won't let him hurt you," he said softly. "I know," she whispered, "but I'm scared." Jim pulled her into his arms, letting her cry into his chest. "We'll face it together, whatever comes." Days passed. The heat rose. The crops withered. The creek shrank to a thin stream. But Jim and Clara worked side by side, refusing to let fear swallow them. Then came the Pinkerton agent. One afternoon, a rider approached, a tall man with a dusty coat and a battered Stetson. He introduced himself as Silas Boyd, an investigator following a trail of counterfeit money. And Robert Price was the prime suspect. Clara's stomach dropped. Silas studied the two of them with sharp eyes. "You both need to be careful. He's dangerous. Cornered men make reckless choices." That night, Jim could barely sleep. He lay awake in the barn loft with Clara curled beside him, the lantern flickering low. He kept imagining Robert returning, imagining danger creeping closer. By dawn, Jim had made a decision. He would help the Pinkertons catch Robert. "Are you sure?" Clara asked, voice trembling as she buttoned his shirt, her hands brushing the wound on his arm from working the fields. Jim cupped her face gently. "If he's arrested, he can't come after you. This ends today." Clara swallowed hard and nodded. "Come back to me." "I will," he promised. Jim rode out with Sheriff Gordon, Silas, and 2 volunteers. They tracked Robert to a worn-down ranch east of Dodge City. Smoke rose from its chimney. Horses grazed nearby. Everything looked calm, too calm. The men spread out quietly. Sheriff Gordon banged on the front door. "Robert Price, step out!" "You're under arrest!" Silence. Then gunfire exploded. Bullets tore through the house walls. The sheriff dove for cover. Silas yelled orders. Jim circled to the back, heart pounding as he moved through clouds of dust and gun smoke. Inside, chaos raged. Men shouted. Guns barked. Splinters flew. Then Jim saw him, Robert Price, climbing out a rear window, gun in hand. Their eyes met. Robert fired. The bullet hit the wall beside Jim, spraying wood chips into his face. Jim took cover behind a stack of firewood and fired back. His shot grazed Robert's hand, forcing him to drop his revolver. Robert cursed and ran toward the stable. Jim chased him. Inside the stable, Robert scrambled toward a saddled horse. He grabbed the reins just as Jim stepped inside with his weapon raised. "Don't do it," Jim warned. Robert glared. "She should have been mine." "Clara is my wife," Jim said steadily, "and she chose me." Robert raised his gun with his uninjured hand, but Jim fired first. The gunshot echoed like thunder. Robert fell backward onto the stable floor, clutching his chest, eyes wide with shock and fury. Within seconds, he went still. Silas and the sheriff raced in. Jim stood over Robert, shaking, his arm bleeding, breath ragged. "It's done," Silas said quietly. "He can't hurt anyone now." They returned to the farm at sunset. Clara saw Jim riding toward her and ran to him, her eyes filled with terror and relief. "Jim!" she cried, pulling him down from the horse. "You're hurt!" Quote, "I'm all right," he managed, though his voice trembled. "It's over, Clara. Robert's gone." Clara pressed her forehead to his chest and sobbed with relief. Jim wrapped his good arm around her, holding her like she was the only thing keeping him standing. From that night on, peace slowly returned to their lives. Jim healed. Clara's sewing business grew. Their crops survived just enough to keep them fed. Townsfolk began to respect them, not because of their hardship, but because of how they faced it together. Months passed. The barn was fixed. The garden grew. And one morning, Clara placed Jim's hand on her stomach with a shy smile. "I think we're starting a family." For the first time in years, Jim felt whole. As winter dusted their land with snow, Jim hung a small wooden sign at the edge of their property. Holay Homestead. Clara stood beside him, warm in his arms, her head resting on his shoulder. "We made it," she whispered. Jim kissed her forehead. "Together." Quote, and in that quiet moment, on a patch of land they had fought to claim, their new life, full of hope, love, and second chances, finally began.